Thank you very much, Dr. Alex Mashilu, our national spokesperson, member of our Central Committee, and greetings to our officials and to all of you, SABC in particular, for coming over here to cover the outcome of our Central Committee. We held our 5th plenary session from Friday to today, the 1st to the 3rd of December 2023. And the Central Committee wished first our ally COSATU, which was founded on the 1st of December 1985, a great 38th anniversary celebrations. And we are looking forward to a growing alliance from strength to strength, continue to work together. But among others, the meeting received a political report as well as policy-related reports, including on the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, the Unemployment Insurance Fund, and the state of local government in South Africa. On the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, the SACP reaffirmed its support for the continuation of the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, which has massified college and university education and training to millions of students, especially from working class and poor families who cannot afford student tuition fees. In supporting the continuation of the NSFAS, the Central Committee attached great importance to clamping down on irregular and corrupt conduct to protect this important national development resource. The SACP calls on the government to reverse the 10% cut in NSFAS allocation, as this austere measure will negatively impact access to college and university education for children from working class and poor families. On the Unemployment Insurance Fund, the Central Committee expressed support for the Minister of Employment, Labour and Labour, Comrade Thulas Ngesi's action to stop the irregular 5 billion UIF contract awarded to a company called Tuja Capital. The UIF is a workers' fund. It must be protected decisively, and no amount of allegations must deter the imperative to protect it. A credible person who becomes aware of an alleged corruption activity cannot refuse to approach law enforcement authorities. The Central Committee further expressed support for all the ministers who started legal action against Tuja Capital CEO for defamation, amongst others. In the same vein, the SACP support the ANC Secretary General's action to lay charges against the said CEO. On the local government presentation, the SACP expressed deep concern about the austerity and its impact on the performance of local government, especially on infrastructure development and delivery of basic services. In the coming period, we will intensify our campaign to roll back austerity and tackle irregular conduct and corruption in municipalities to improve service delivery performances. The Central Committee reiterated on the issue of rent manipulation. We reiterated our stance, indicating that individuals directly involved in manipulating our currency pair or exchange rate with other currencies must be held personally liable. They must be charged with corruption. While fining the banks and other traders is important, the fines are too low, mostly at 10% of their annual turnover, and must be increased. Moreover, alone, the fines are not enough to deter the manipulation of our currency, given the astronomical profits that the implicated banks control. The SACP therefore calls for new legislative measures to clamp down on the manipulation of our currency. The Reserve Bank must consider amending foreign exchange trading licenses for guilty parties to allow only provision of basic foreign exchange facilities to clients, but prohibiting entities from trading for own account. Let us recall in April 2015, the Competition Commission initiated a rand manipulation complaint, which it updated in August 2016, in total including 28 foreign-controlled multinational and domestic commercial banks. It is possible that there was further rand manipulation outside the 6 years. This must be investigated as well. On halting the erosion of our national industrial base and defending workers' livelihoods, the SACP is deeply concerned by and denounces this week's announcement by ArcelorMittal. The Luxembourg-based multinational corporation said it intends to close its Newcastle long steel manufacturing plant and the Vereeniging plant, where workers produce steel used in sectors such as construction, mining, and others. If it closes the plant, ArcelorMittal will destroy domestic productive capacity for high-grade specialty steel used in advanced industries such as automotive manufacturing. ArcelorMittal's intention to close the plant will have a wider impact downstream, where it will force some enterprises to close and others to turn to steel importation. Still, those who will turn to steel importation will experience logistics-related lead time delays and costs, and this will have a negative impact as well. The entire scenario will contribute to deindustrialization and could culminate in additional retrenchments beyond the 3,500 workers estimated in the media coverage. ArcelorMittal's intention is a stark reminder of the human cost associated with profit-driven neoliberal state, corporate restructuring, and deindustrialization. The Central Committee called for urgent, decisive state interventions to stop the closure of the Newcastle long steel plant and the Vereeniging plant. As a matter of principle, before any enterprise can contemplate a decision of such a magnitude that ArcelorMittal's intention bears, there must be direct engagement for state intervention. There must be meaningful consultation with trade unions representing workers. Other stakeholders likely to be affected both downstream and in the surrounding areas must also be consulted meaningfully. Continuity of production at the Newcastle long steel plant and the Vereeniging plant must not hinge on its ownership by ArcelorMittal. Therefore, state intervention should include possible transfer of ownership or direct takeover of the plant from ArcelorMittal to ensure the continuity of production as opposed to allowing ArcelorMittal to close it. Furthermore, state intervention must include immediate measures to address the undercapacity crisis and disruptions affecting rail, port, and electricity generation operations. The crisis affecting this infrastructure impacts the wider economy and employment creation. Also, there must be decisive actions against theft, looting, and vandalism of public network infrastructure and materials as well as components. The criminality amounts to economic sabotage and must be treated and punished as such. On the wider working class unity to roll back neoliberalism, going to the root of ArcelorMittal's scenario, we just want to indicate that what was once a state-owned ISCO since 1928, it's now called ArcelorMittal. This has resulted from ISCO's privatization in 1989 by the apartheid regime after adopting neoliberalism in the 1970s. Along with the subsequent foreign acquisition and mergers, ISCO's privatization marked the beginning of the distressing journey that forced our nation's industrial capacity to succumb to foreign control and private profit-driven interest. Likewise, the full takeover of Saldanha Steel Mill in 2002, developed through a joint venture with a public entity, the Industrial Development Corporation, which paved the way for ArcelorMittal to determine the future of our domestic steel manufacturing industrial landscape with far-reaching implications. The developing situation reflects the failure of both privatization and other neoliberal policies adopted during and after apartheid. The global context in which neoliberal forces push privatization affecting state-owned enterprises such as ISCO was and still is characterized by capitalist competition for dominance and monopoly. This is a characteristic feature of imperialism. Foreign-controlled multinational corporations such as ArcelorMittal have multiple manufacturing factories in different global regions. Others have overcapacity. As a result, they tend to neglect investment into parts of the productive capacity that they capture from privatization, mergers, and acquisition. The repercussions for affected countries have been dire. In our national situation, they include the anti-developmental import parity pricing and a trend towards domestic steel manufacturing substitution with imports. This contributes to deindustrialization and therefore job losses. It is important to note that privatization did not go alone, but was part of an array of neoliberal policies that coalesced to generate the unpleasant situation. Austerity, also called fiscal consolidation, curtailed capital expenditure in SOEs, that is state-owned enterprises, ultimately discrediting it as a bailout. As part of the neoliberal policy regime, the affected SOEs were corporatized and outsourced, including at Transnet and Eskom, which serves as another entry point to hollow them out. This, along with the other neoliberal policies, unleashed a destruction of their productive capacity, just as state capture did. The policy reforms to deepen and widen the opening up of state-controlled infrastructure networks in order to convert them into new fields of private capital accumulation by competing profit-driven interests are also part of the neoliberal policy regime. In this, neoliberalism has reframed privatization, which now includes insinuating private profit-driven interest in targeted state-owned infrastructure networks such as electricity generation, rail, ports, and water. The Central Committee reaffirmed the SACP's program to forge a popular left front and build a powerful socialist movement of the workers and the poor as a strategic response to build wider working-class unity, strengthen and intensify the struggle for a policy change towards a better South Africa. On solidarity with workers against retrenchment by Sibanye-Stillwater and others, Central Committee vehemently condemned the insidious actions of the exploitative Sibanye-Stillwater, led by the rapacious CEO Neil Froneman. We salute the trade unions at Sibanye-Stillwater for their valiant efforts in thwarting the company's reprehensible attempts to retrench 1,057 workers. The workers were ultimately redeployed to its gold operations. However, our battle is far from over. It is an outrage that while the toiling masses are forced into the scorching depths of the earth for a pittance, Froneman shamelessly pockets astronomical pay packages. This includes, for instance, 189 million rand he got in 2022 and a staggering 300 million in 2021. This egregious act of corporate greed is an affront to the hard-working workers. The SACP urges trade unions at Sibanye-Stillwater to unite against the impending retrenchments of 575 workers, which the exorbitantly paid frontman calls a cost-cutting measure. Under his stewardship, Sibanye-Stillwater's retrenchment process has coerced 550 workers at Kloof 4 Shaft in Gauteng to opt for voluntary severance packages, and 348 workers across its gold operation to opt for voluntary early retirement packages. We therefore must hold capitalist mind bosses accountable for worker casualties and injuries as well. It is with heavy hearts and profound sorrow that we extend our deepest condolences to the families and comrades of the mine workers who lost their lives in the tragic incident at the Impala Platinum Mine on Monday, 27th November 2023. 12 workers have since died, and 75 workers now bear the physical and emotional scars of a disaster that could have been prevented. This is yet another grim chapter in the ongoing saga of corporate negligence and exploitation in the mines. Since the beginning of this year alone, we have mourned the loss of at least 55 mine workers, each death an unavoidable consequence of a system that values profit above human life. The Central Committee denounced the profit-driven negligence. To support the trade unions, the workers who sustained injuries, and the families who lost their loved ones, the SACP is calling for a thorough investigation to hold the capitalist bosses both at Impala Platinum and other mines across the country and other employment sections accountable. Prosecution must form part of the measures to ensure accountability and deter negligence. To the trade unions at Impala Platinum and in the mining sector at large, and to the working class broadly, the SACP Central Committee calls and says, let us mourn, but let us unite to intensify the struggle for fundamental change, reaffirming our unwavering commitment to workers' rights and safety, and beyond that, to the ultimate goals of social emancipation and a society without the exploitation of labor by capital. On the national health insurance, the SACP unequivocally denounces the profit-driven private healthcare sector maneuvers to obstruct the adoption of the National Health Insurance Bill. Their aim is to dilute the NHI bill so that by the time of its implementation, it will not even be a shadow of what it should have been. Now, the National Council of Provinces sitting that was scheduled to adopt the NHI bill this week was postponed to December the 6th. We reject the notion by profit-seeking interests that consultation on the NHI bill was insufficient. After over 15 years since the NHI discourse first entered the national agenda, there is no time for delay, but a need to move forward promptly and decisively. The extensive public consultation that has taken place over the years has showed overwhelming popular support for the NHI. We emphasize the urgency of passing the bill and fully implementing the NHI. The finalization of this crucial legislation on December the 6th should represent a significant milestone. Only if it does so will the NHI bill help dismantle inequality in healthcare and the neglect of too many workers and poor people's health needs. The NHI bill must align with the principles of equality. It must establish a national health insurance fund, guaranteeing free comprehensive health care coverage for all citizens. Private medical aid schemes will only cover additional services beyond what the NHI fund covers. NHI funding should be rooted in the principle of social solidarity, with a commitment to redistribute more from the surplus that the wealthy appropriate from our economy. Emphasis on the development of primary health care, a move aimed at unifying the health system, should remain a pivotal aspect under the NHI. We firmly reject maneuvers that seek to reinforce the dominance of medical aid scheme and perpetuate a profit-driven healthcare system. Today, there are too many people who have a medical aid cover, but which becomes useless as the finance interests of those who design medical aid schemes, benefits are curtailed, and those benefits are exhausted mostly around mid-year. Majority of the people with medical aid, they will tell you now in the last month of the year, they no longer have medical aid cover. This is because medical aid schemes have been financialized, with medical aid financial administration companies raking in profits from workers' contributions. And this must stop, and this will be stopped by the NHI. And also, the imbalance in subsidies, where the state subsidizes more the 16% who are on medical aid than the 84% in public health, is just ludicrous and must be ended. On the reconfiguration of the alliance in the 2024 elections, the Central Committee reaffirmed continued engagement with our allies, but stressed by the struggle for a reconfigured alliance as our strategy for the 2024 national and provincial elections. The reconfiguration must include active participation in the manifesto consultation process to ensure that the interests and aims of the working class find profound expression. It must include as well electoral lists that consider the requisite capacity to serve the people diligently and wholeheartedly. This list must be inclusive to give active expression to the principle of collective leadership of our shared strategy as the alliance, that is the strategy of the National Democratic Revolution. Everyone on the list must be subject to the accountability to the alliance and the people over and above their individual alliance partner. What the representative will say in legislative and executive organs of the state must also reflect the perspectives of the people at large and the alliance as a whole, as opposed to one alliance partner. We are forging a popular left front and building a powerful socialist movement of the workers and the poor at the same time. This is important to intensify immediate working class struggles and will serve as an insurance of the working class on all fronts going forward. On the 16 days of activism for no violence against women and children campaign, the Central Committee directed all SACP structures and members to intensify the 16 days of activism for no violence against women and children campaign. This campaign must be sustained beyond the 16 days to become an everyday intensified struggle to end all forms of gender-based violence, eliminate patriarchy, and achieve a non-sexist society characterized by gender equality. on international solidarity. Venezuela, for instance, which is home to the world's largest oil reserves, is under unilateral and extortionist sanctions imposed by the imperialist regime of the United States, mostly supported by its Western European imperialist allies. The United States manipulates international oil prices through its unilateral sanctions, not only against Venezuela, but against other major oil-producing countries. The unilateral sanctions also undermine the United Nations multilateral and legal frameworks and are among the major drivers of the global cost of living crisis. This crisis severely impacts oil and oil byproducts import-dependent countries like South Africa. A delegation of the SACP visited Venezuela last month. Among others, our delegation engaged with the Venezuelan authorities on oil supply for South Africa, not for the SACP, for South Africa. The Venezuelan authorities agreed. They further indicated that they have adopted an oil supply set aside for our country. Our country must exploit this. To bring down the cost of living in our country, considering oil and oil byproducts like petrol and diesel as critical inputs in industrial production, agriculture and transportation, the SACP calls on the government to source the cheaply available oil from Venezuela. The SACP reiterates its solidarity with the people of Venezuela against imperialist machination and unilateral sanctions by the US and its Western imperialist powers. We wish the Communist and Socialist parties of Venezuela fraternity and ever-going strength and unity as they defend their beautiful motherland. At the same time, it is important to indicate that while the US is refusing us and other countries to trade with Venezuela, the US companies like Chevron are operating in Venezuela. On solidarity with the people of Cuba, we noticed that in October, the North Gauteng High Court Division of South Africa criticized a committee that endorsed a 50 million humanitarian aid for Cuba and set it aside. The court concluded that the committee did not form a quorum when it voted to pass the aid. It must be noted that the judgment does not take away South Africa's rights to consider, adopt, and offer Cuba or any nation in need humanitarian aid. Against the imperialist economic blockade and unilateral sanctions imposed by the United States, as well as their effects, the SACP is calling on South Africa to adopt a more enhanced humanitarian aid package for Cuba as a matter of urgency. In addition, we call on the government to hold accountable those who have been blocking Cuban-developed medicine, which can stop preventable diabetes amputations in South Africa. Putting people first, the government must prioritize engaging with the Cuban government to secure the medication, to save lives in South Africa, and stop these unnecessary amputations of people in our hospitals. The government, like the SACP, must be deeply worried that South Africa is the top country in Africa of people living with diabetes. According to the International Diabetes Federation's 10th edition, published in 2021, South Africa had 4.2 million aged 20 to 70 with diabetes. This number is growing. More worrying is that, according to medical literature, based on South Africa's surgical records, there are many preventable diabetes-related amputations in our country. Those affected include a significant number of the workers and poor who either have no income or earn less than 70,000 per annum. On the solidarity with the Middle East people, the Central Committee reaffirmed its support for the just struggles of the Palestinian people for democratic national sovereignty and strongly denounces the genocide against Palestinians perpetrated by the apartheid Israeli settler regime. Since October 7, 2023, the apartheid Israeli regime has killed over 15,000 Palestinian people right in front of the world. Israeli leaders must be held accountable for this genocide. The Central Committee also reaffirmed its support for the intensification of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign against Israel. The SACP will push this campaign forward. Amongst others, we will also engage with trade unions to mobilize workers to refuse to handle imports and exports to Israel. It is in this regard that we continue to extend our undivided and unflinching solidarity to the people of Palestine, and we wish them strength as they resist against this continued occupation and bombardment by this apartheid Israel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And that if I may say today, the SABC and other media have to provide their teams because of the many activities that take place. So I'm not sure whether we will have any action. And then, yes. So, okay, we have teams, and one of the let me thank you for coming. At least I expected you to come to another one. Lunch will be served at the first one. Thank you so much. This will help us move our message within the news the sooner the better.
So we are done.
Yeah, no questions. Yeah.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you very much.
All right, Slav, thanks.
Very sad, I mean.
Remember, Slav,
Yeah, but
They must bring